So I wanted to talk about this article that I read about a month ago by John Humphreys. Don't be conned by the anti-vax zealots. They threaten to do serious harm to all of us. Now, a zealot, for anyone who doesn't know, is a person who is fanatical and uncompromising in pursuit of their religious, political or other ideals. So, humans are contrary creatures. When we are faced with danger, our first reaction is to pretend it doesn't really exist. Our second is to panic. Our third, when it threatens to overwhelm us, is to find someone to blame. And when the cavalry finally appear on the horizon, we turn our backs on them. Well, who's this we, first of all? Are you talking about all humans? All 7-8 billion of us? Or are you talking about just Brits? Or are you talking about John Humphreys? I should imagine it's the latter. So it has been with the COVID danger. For precious weeks back in the early spring, we ignored the risk, crammed into sports stadiums and rock concerts, and then, when we realised we might be signing our death certificates, we closed down the country and condemned vast numbers of elderly people to a lonely death. Well, I didn't do any of that, because I started taking COVID seriously as of the 1st of February, which I've said before. I stopped seeing friends, I was dead careful about going past people, washing my hands, all that sort of thing. And I didn't cram myself into anywhere that looked like it was overcrowded. So, yeah, again, who is this we? And I certainly didn't condemn vast numbers of elderly people to a lonely death. I never asked for that. All I asked for was the freedom to deal with the pandemic in any way that I saw fit, and that would include staying home from work if I had to. So that's why I was in favour of furlough, but I don't think I was ever actually against anyone doing what they wanted. When that didn't kill off the virus, we blamed the scientists and the epidemiologists and anyone else we could find, especially, often with justification, the politicians. Now, there's a couple of things about that. First of all, I've been saying right from the beginning that we shouldn't be blaming anyone for this virus. It's a force of nature. Like, I was making the case right from the beginning that Boris Johnson should be given a lot of leeway for having to deal with this unprecedented situation. I'm starting to run out of patience for Boris Johnson's handling of it. But one thing that I really hate about this pandemic, above everything else, is the blame game that we've been playing. People blaming their neighbours for having friends or family over, or people blaming this, blaming that, blaming young people, just blaming everyone. It's not helpful. Like, viruses spread, that's what they do. You can't blame people for spreading a virus. And it seems like the only people that didn't get the blame were the BLM protesters. So that's interesting to know. But look, when that didn't kill off the virus, no one went into lockdown with the illusion that it was going to kill off the virus, did they? Or did they? I mean, I certainly didn't. I thought it was about pushing it back into the summer and flattening the curve. I'm pretty sure that's what they sold it to us as. Not about killing off the virus, like we were going to go into lockdown for a couple of weeks and then we'd all come out and the virus would be gone. So I already feel like I'm being gaslit by John Humphreys, so let's see what else we've got in this article, shall we? And then, one dark November morning, the bugle sounded. There were no crowds celebrating in the highway and byways, just the cautious words over the airwaves of a boffin who, for most of us, might have been talking in Serbo-Croat. Weird stuff about a messenger RNA that would enter our cells and trick them into producing viral proteins and trigger a defensive immune response. Did you understand it? Of course not. Nor did the millions of people who heard it and apparently decided it was a bad thing. They, like me, would not know the difference between a messenger RNA and a Christmas cracker, but they knew this vaccine would do us harm and we'd better avoid it. So here the implication is basically that anyone who is in any way sceptical about the COVID vaccine is an anti-vax zealot in John Humphreys' eyes. So, and I really don't like that characterisation of people who have got scepticism towards the vaccine, because I'm one of them for a start. But I've had vaccines before, and since becoming an adult as well, I've had tetanus shots and all sorts of other shit. So I really don't like being called an anti-vaxxer. I prefer to go as a Pfizer skeptic. So that's what I'm going to refer to myself as from now on, because it's only the COVID vaccine that really concerns me. And John Humphreys has already admitted that he doesn't know what he's talking about, so in my eyes, his opinion is worth as much as the people that decided that it was a bad thing, the Pfizer skeptics. What's the difference? They're both either equally worthless or equally worth hearing. But John Humphreys assumes that his position is superior for some reason, but he's already admitted that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So, no matter that if enough people heeded their warnings, the vaccine would prove worthless and many, many more people would die from COVID-19. Is that true? How do you know that? I'm convinced that once you get COVID-19, you get some sort of immunity. I'm totally convinced of it. How long that immunity lasts for is anyone's guess. But otherwise, we'd be seeing reinfections all across the globe. You know, we've had this virus all around the world for an entire year now at this point. And I haven't heard much in the way of reinfections. So I should imagine that once you get it, you're immune. And like I said, who knows how long that lasts for. And maybe you're not immune once a new strain comes along. I don't really know. But it just seems strange to me that I've managed to go an entire year, especially with me travelling all across the country for work. Literally, I've been in and out of Wales plenty of times this year. It just seems strange to me that I haven't managed to pick it up at this point. What's more, for these zealots, it would not have mattered whether the scientists were injecting us with RNA or TNT. Vaccinations are bad. They are born-again anti-vaxxers who threaten to do us serious harm. All of us. Well, no, like I said, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm a Pfizer skeptic. And I'm certainly not a zealot. If people want to go and get the vaccine, then I'm not going to stand in their way. But what I don't like is people trying to pressure me into getting a vaccine. Growing up, I was always taught that if someone tries to pressure you to take drugs or stick a needle in your arm, then you should resist that pressure. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. But apparently that makes me a zealot, even though I'm not standing in anyone's way to go and get the vaccine. All I want is for people to be allowed to do what they want, and that includes people who don't want the vaccine to be allowed not to take the vaccine. Let me declare that I am a pro-vaxxer. Oh, well done, John Humphreys. What a brave position to take there. Well, I'm also a pro-vaxxer. Hence why I've been vaccinated before, voluntarily. My life has spanned a period in this nation's history during which the lives of millions have been saved or transformed by the miracle of vaccination. And I have seen firsthand the terrible price paid by the generation before me, including my own father, George. Now, he goes on to talk about how George caught measles and it ended up blinding him for virtually his entire life. But to be honest, the way I feel like I'm being gaslit and the way John Humphreys has got confused between what actually the reason we went into lockdown, it wouldn't surprise me if he was getting his father confused with somebody else's father as well. So I'm going to skip over this bit, but you can read it if you want to. He just talks about the effect of measles on his dad. By the time my wife and I had our own children, measles had been conquered. The MMR vaccine also saw off those other horrible diseases, mumps and rubella. What a triumph for science and humanity. Well, yeah, I would agree with that, because I'm pro-vax. And you know, one thing that I've really become aware of over the past couple of months is just how privileged I am to be part of a generation that doesn't have to worry about mumps and rubella and measles. And to be honest, I didn't really know what the effects of any of them were. I didn't know anything about them before this pandemic came along and people started talking about them again, especially in the context of vaccinations. But yeah, that is a privilege that's been afforded to me and my generation by vaccines. So I am thankful for vaccines. Until that is, the likes of Andrew Wakefield came along. Wakefield was a doctor when he produced research that showed the vaccination was dangerous because it was linked to autism. But it wasn't. Wakefield was lying. Well, first of all, I keep being told that I should listen to the doctors, and Wakefield clearly knows more about what he's talking about than John Humphreys does, by John Humphreys' own admission. Because John Humphreys has said that he doesn't know the difference between a vaccine and a Christmas cracker. So why should I expect John Humphreys to be correct about Andrew Wakefield's position? And I don't like the idea that John Humphreys is able to say that Andrew Wakefield was lying as well. Because lying's all about intent. And it's such an uncharitable interpretation of what Andrew Wakefield's done. Is there no chance that he was just mistaken? Is that not possible? And Andrew Wakefield's a name that I keep hearing pop up, especially since the vaccine scepticism has really started to get going. And I watched a couple of interviews with Andrew Wakefield, and it's not all as it seems, is all I'm going to say about that. And I would encourage anyone to go and watch an interview with Andrew Wakefield and get it straight from the horse's mouth, rather than via John Humphreys, who has already admitted that he doesn't know what he's talking about. His research was bogus. How? How do you know that? How could you possibly know that? I couldn't know that. I would never claim to know that either. I would stay neutral on the issue. I would read his research and say, oh, well, fuck knows, I don't know the difference between an RNA messenger and a Christmas cracker. He was preying on the fears of the most vulnerable in society, scared parents. He was eventually struck off by the General Medical Council after the longest fitness to practice hearing in history. He is now in the United States making lots of money and basking in the glory of many credulous souls who subscribe to the grotesque anti-vaccine movement. Grotesque and very, very dangerous. Well, what do you expect when you ostracize him from the medical community? Like, what is he going to do? If he sincerely believes that vaccines cause autism, which I don't think that he does, not from what I've heard. From what I heard, he actually gave his kids the MMR vaccine. But if he genuinely believes that, and then the General Medical Council strike him off, what do you expect him to do? Just go and starve to death? To not share what he believes to be the truth, unless you just think he's a liar? But I'm not convinced of that. I don't know. Dangerous not just to those babies who will not have had the protection they are entitled to, but to every other child in the land. Well, if a child's vaccinated, then it's not dangerous to them. And if we're going to talk about entitlements, aren't parents entitled to not get their children vaccinated if they want? If they believe that that is the right thing to do? Are they not entitled to not do that? Vaccines are mighty weapons, but for them to wipe out a disease entirely, it is often vital to establish herd immunity. Yeah, well, do we actually want to wipe out the disease? Do we want to wipe out COVID? It sounds a bit idealistic to me. Like, I mean, obviously, everyone would be happy. Well, I say everyone. Most normal people would be happier if COVID didn't exist, if COVID was wiped out. But at what cost? That's the real question. Because we could wipe out the disease by killing everyone on the planet, couldn't we? But that would be kind of stupid. And there are signs that measles is beginning to make a comeback. That's one of the reasons I describe myself as a pro-vaxxer. Yeah, well, so do I. But I'm also a Pfizer skeptic. Many of you will say there is a huge difference between a measles vaccine and a COVID vaccine. COVID is new. The vaccine is untried. We should be very, very cautious just in case of potentially lethal side effects. Perhaps, but only up to a point. COVID-19 may be new, but the coronavirus from which it springs is not. It has caused two relatively new epidemics, SARS and MERS, and scientists have had 20 years to study them in detail. Well, how do you know that the research done on SARS and MERS is in any way applicable to COVID-19? You don't know that, and I don't know that. So why even put that in there? And the reason that the SARS and MERS diseases haven't got vaccines is two reasons, really. One, the diseases weren't considered to be too much of a problem globally. There were, from what I understand, there were small outbreaks of both of them, and they just sort of vanished on their own after a little while. And two, because there's no financial incentive to create vaccines for SARS and MERS. But if you think about financial incentives, isn't part of the financial incentive for creating a COVID vaccine, isn't that in part the government's fault for locking everyone down and saying, yeah, we can't reopen until we get vaccinated? That's where the financial incentive comes from, not because people actually want it. I mean, I'm sure people do actually want it, but that the number of people who would actually want it would be a lot lower if the government hadn't rescinded all our civil liberties for the past year, wiped a year off of all of our lives. And I know people that don't want the vaccine, but who will take it if it means that they can get their life back to normal. Is that not coercive? That feels like coercion to me. Coercion which then creates a financial incentive to make the vaccine. Also, I thought in this country that we were on board with the idea that healthcare should not be linked to profit, that healthcare should be about healthcare and not about profit, not about making money, and that's why we have a free public health service. But it seems like everyone's just forgotten about that. As for side effects, those who have had test jabs report that they are comparable to the effects of a mild dose of flu. Most have no side effects at all. Oh, it's a bit like COVID then, isn't it? Not even the symptoms of a mild hangover, reported by one man who volunteered for a test jab in Texas. Well, I don't want a mild dose of flu, and I don't want a hangover. I'm really not a fan of hangovers, and that's one of the reasons I don't really drink. Although I have been drinking over the past couple of weeks, I must admit. Nor has the new vaccine been rushed through. Not unless you ignore the 100,000 people who have volunteered to take part in the trials. Well, do you think 100,000 people is a big enough representative sample for 70 million people? Or how about 7 billion people? And especially seeing as how they only take certain participants in the trials. They tend to only take healthy people. Now, I don't know exactly what the criteria for participating in the trials was, but we have only just found out that people with severe allergies should not go to get this vaccine because they're likely to have a reaction. We had to find that out the hard way. Like the 100,000 people who volunteered in the trials, we didn't learn from the 100,000 people that people with severe allergies should not take the vaccine, which makes the public literally guinea pigs. If you have to roll out the vaccine to the general public to find out what the side effects are going to be, or if there are going to be bad side effects, that makes the public literally guinea pigs. And like I said, if people want to go and guinea pig themselves, crack on. I don't care, it's not my problem. But don't come at me trying to pump me full of snake oil, please. How desperately sad and worrying then that so many people, some polls say a third, are uncertain or very unlikely to be vaccinated. And this really is the line that got me in this whole article. I mean, it was all pretty much nonsense from start to finish, but this was the one. Because he's calling me a zealot for saying, no, I don't want to take your snake oil, please. And yet, he's the one saying, oh, only 66% of people agree with me. Only 66%. And here's the other thing. We're not actually going for 100% vaccination here. We're going for herd immunity. And herd immunity can be provided by a combination of natural immunity and vaccinations. So let's say, for argument's sake, that 70% of people have natural immunity to the virus because they've already contracted it. They reckon that you need about 80% immunity to achieve herd immunity. That would mean that only 10% of the public would need to get vaccinated in order to achieve the magic 80%. So 66% of the public being vaccinated should be enough to get herd immunity over the line. But that's not good enough for John Humphreys. And a third of people are either uncertain or very unlikely. So he's lumping the people who are uncertain about the vaccine in with the anti-vax zealots. Well, I've just got to ask John Humphreys, which one of us is the zealot here? Which one of us is fanatical and uncompromising about their religious, political or other ideals? And do you know the reason above everything else why I don't want the vaccine? It's not necessarily because I think it's going to be bad for me, but it's because I should have the right to refuse the vaccine if I want. It's as simple as that. And so I'm going to stand up for that right. And this is where I think conspiracy theorists really let themselves down. Because I saw this on Facebook towards the beginning of the pandemic. And it says, if you don't believe they can inject a computer chip into you through a vaccine needle, think again. This is a photo of one next to a grain of rice. So the conspiracy theorists think that they're going to inject us with microchips along with this vaccine. But that sounds crazy. And I completely understand why people think that that sounds crazy. But here's the real argument that conspiracy theorists should be having, and this is where I get disappointed with conspiracy theorists, where they let themselves down. If you have no right to refuse this vaccine, what right do you have to refuse that microchip when they come at you with that? When they come at you and say, oh, we've got this new strain of COVID 21, and in order to make sure that everyone's tracking and tracing properly, we need to plant this microchip under your skin. What argument are you going to deploy against the microchip if you've already lost the vaccine argument? If you've already conceded that you have no right to refuse the vaccine, what are you going to say when they come at you with a microchip? That, and I want to find out how long natural immunity lasts for. And here's another thing. What if the vaccine only provides you immunity for, let's say, 6 months, right? And every 6 months you have to go back to get a booster shot. But natural immunity, from contracting the virus naturally and letting your immune system shift it on its own, what if that gives you immunity for, say, 10 years? Which one would you rather choose? Because I think, me personally, I'd rather take my chances on the virus than keep having to get vaccinated every 6 months, especially seeing as how I don't know what the long-term effects of the vaccine are. But when it comes to the virus, I suspect I already had it back in December of 2019, and I suspect that I'm immune to it. So I want to wait and find out how long immunity lasts for. I want to find out the hard way, and that should be my right to find out the hard way. And do you not need people like me to find out the hard way in order to know how COVID behaves exactly? Like, even from a purely scientific point of view, surely you would appreciate people like me who don't want to go and get the vaccine so that you could then further study the effects of what would happen to us. And while we're on the subject of side effects of the vaccine, what happens if you don't go and get the second booster shot? Like, is that dangerous at all? Because there will be a number of people in this country who don't go to get the second shot, either because they forget or, whatever reason, it doesn't really matter. There will be people out there who don't go and get that second shot. Is that going to be a problem? What happens then? And what are the effects of the vaccine going to be on people who take drugs, for example? Because I know that recreational drug users wouldn't have been allowed into the initial trials. So, once again, the only way we're going to find out what the reaction there is going to be is by rolling it out to the population, by treating the population as guinea pigs, essentially. Or people who have to take other medication for that matter. What's going to happen to them? Do we know what the reaction's going to be between this vaccine and other medications that need to be taken? No, of course we don't. How could we possibly know that after only 100,000 people were trialled? Those were mostly, I should imagine, 100,000 healthy people, because they select healthy people for trials. And as they go along, they gradually broaden that group until you're at a point where the entire population is the trial. And I don't particularly want to be a guinea pig for some American private pharmaceutical corporation, thank you very much. And I will not have my civil liberties held at needlepoint for the sake of some American big pharma corporation. You can forget about it. I'll take my chances with the virus, as is my right. Thank you very much.